Welcome to this video on academic paragraph writing. The specific skill we'll focus on is connection. Basically, that's explaining how the evidence you have in your paragraph is linked with the overall point that you're making. Goals for this video will be to define connection, explain how it supports the point, how it can add clarity to your evidence, and how to avoid being redundant and obvious. The definition we're going to look at is to explain how the evidence you select connects to the point or the main claim you're making, and to note that you can use your own background knowledge and experiences to build those connections into your writing. Let's jump right in. We're going to make a point about the Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. We're going to say that the protagonist, and sort of weirdly the antagonist, Ebenezer Scrooge, evolves from being a cruel man into being a kind and appreciative one. The evidence that we'll have is at the end of the novel, Tiny Tim, the boy on crutches, who Scrooge earlier looks down upon with dismissive apathy, shouts out for all to hear, "God bless us, everyone." So now let's look. The point we're trying to make is that Scrooge has evolved from being a jerk to a good guy. We start off great with this because in our context, we say that Scrooge was a jerk to Tiny Tim. Now we have to prove that Scrooge actually turned out to be a good guy. If you've read the book, you kind of get where this is going. But as a writer, you don't want to assume that your audience has read the book, so you got to explain it. Because if I've never read the book, I could sit here and say, wait a minute, you're trying to prove to me that Scrooge is a good guy just because there's some tiny man who's yelling, "God bless us"? How do I know that Scrooge didn't go into zombie mode and is ripping people's heads off, and Tiny Tim is screaming in terror, saying, "God bless us, everyone"? That's where the connection statement comes in. Tim's excitement and love towards Scrooge is the confirmation that Ebenezer really has changed. Now, as a reader, I'm satisfied. I know that Tim's explanation is made out of love, and it shows that, okay, Scrooge must have changed for Tim to love him, where before he was a jerk. Connections can also be the thing that actually makes your point and your evidence make sense. So you can see we have A and B going on, but the evidence is going to be the exact same. It's that the average 14-year-old spends 2 hours a day on their phone. So in paragraph A, the point we're going to make is that cell phone usage has been detrimental to the social lives of teenagers. Point B we're going to make is that cell phone usage has been a great tool for helping social lives of teenagers. I'm hoping you can see there's a complete opposite claims, but they have the exact same evidence. The only way this will make sense is with a strong connection statement. So over in B, to try to say that's been bad, instead of spending time socializing with friends and family, making positive connections, teenagers' faces are glued to the glass screen. Doesn't love them back. On the flip side, if we want to say that cell phones have been great, cell phones have made it much easier to connect and communicate with friends and family. Whereas a person may have spent that time in front of a television before, now teens are using downtime to stay connected socially. So I'm hoping that you can see, without these strong connections, it doesn't matter what your evidence is. It almost doesn't even matter what your point is. They're not going to work. It is the connecting statement that puts everything together. I do want to offer a word of caution. The first is to avoid being redundant in your connection statements. That's when you say the same thing more than once. The next thing is avoid stating the obvious. That means to avoid stating obvious things. Sorry, I had to. But just trust your audience's intelligence. So we'll go over some examples. Here's what redundancy can look like. The point we're making. Harry Potter Chamber of Secrets. J.K. Rowling creates Hermione Granger, somewhat bossy friend, who values keeping promises. Harry tries to cut back on a commitment he made to go to a party at the last minute. She bossily reminds him that promises are promises. She is bossing him around and telling him that promises are important to keep. Therefore, she cares about promises. Our evidence used the word bossy and promises are promises. So to just say this is her being bossy and that she cares about promises, you're just saying the same thing twice. Try to rephrase things in a new way to support the point. So maybe we could have something like Rowley has Hermione care about Harry keeping his word no matter what the situation. So we've used different words to sort of restate the point that we're trying to make. Here's where stating the obvious can come into a factor, especially with things like this when it's nonfiction. So let's say we said Hurricane Katrina was a devastating force that overwhelmed the Gulf Coast economically. According to North Texas professor Bernard Weinstein, the economic loss of the region could reach $250 billion. That is $250 million. That is a lot of money. Your audience knows that's a lot of money. They don't need to be told. So what can you do instead? Well, perhaps you could sort of put it into a different context that really makes your point pop out, that the devastating force was overwhelmingly destructive economically. To put that loss into perspective, according to the World Bank, that's about the same size as the economy of Finland. So that's a different way of stating your evidence in a way that might make your point pop. Now, sometimes you feel like the evidence will just speak for itself. In those cases, don't force a connection. I would say this should be your last option, but if you feel like it's the right strategy, it's better to have no connection than to just restate the obvious. Hopefully that's helpful. So this video, to restate, we defined connection as explaining how your evidence connects with your point. We explained how it can be supportive of your point, how it can add clarity to the evidence, and how to avoid being redundant and obvious. Hopefully that's helpful. Have a great day.